Highly intelligent INFJs often live in a world that seems strange to others, and this strangeness is reflected in their habits that often look peculiar on the outside, but are deeply logical, meaningful, and necessary for them. Because INFJs are both intuitive and highly sensitive, their daily habits often develop as coping mechanisms, survival strategies, or outlets for processing the immense amount of emotional and intellectual data they take in from the world. Their strangeness is not eccentricity for its own sake, but rather the inevitable byproduct of living with heightened perception and inner complexity. One of the strangest habits intelligent INFJs exhibit is their tendency to rehearse conversations in their heads long before they ever happen. They run through every possible scenario, every potential response, and even rehearse the emotions that might come with them. What looks like overthinking is, for them, a form of preparation, almost like an inner scriptwriting session where they refine their words until they carry the precise weight and meaning they want. This habit comes from their natural dislike of misunderstandings and their deep desire to communicate with clarity. But to outsiders, this level of rehearsal can seem obsessive or unnecessarily intense. Another habit is the way INFJs will suddenly withdraw into silence after long periods of socializing, even if the gathering is enjoyable. To those who do not understand, it seems abrupt, as if something has gone wrong. But this is a survival instinct. Intelligent INFJs are constantly scanning the emotional undercurrents of those around them, interpreting body language, tone, and unsaid feelings. This process, though unconscious, drains them of energy. Their withdrawal is not rejection, but recuperation. They disappear into quiet spaces, sometimes even locking themselves away for hours or days, not to shut out the world entirely, but to filter through everything they have absorbed, almost like wringing out a sponge. If you want to truly understand yourself and unlock your full potential as an INFJ, check out the INFJ Playbook today. The link is in the description of this video. There is also the peculiar way intelligent INFJs tend to notice patterns in human behavior and record them mentally. They can recall small details about someone, the way they blinked when lying, the slight pause before they agreed, the subtle shift in tone when they were hiding something. They may never mention these observations, but they catalog them as though they are piecing together a larger puzzle. To others, it can feel unsettling, almost as if the INFJ can see through veils of pretense with uncanny precision. This strange habit of watching, remembering, and connecting dots makes INFJs both intimidating and magnetic, because people feel simultaneously understood and exposed in their presence. They're known to lose track of time completely when immersed in something meaningful. They might spend hours writing, reading, or analyzing ideas, forgetting to eat or sleep, as if they have stepped into another realm. It is not mere distraction. It is absorption, a deep dive into a mental landscape where hours pass like minutes. And when they finally emerge, they carry the strange, disoriented air of someone who has traveled far away and returned. This peculiar relationship with time often makes them unreliable in routine matters, even though their inner world is far more disciplined than anyone suspects. They also have a peculiar way of creating symbolic rituals around the most ordinary things. A simple walk may become a meditative act where they decode signs from the universe. A favorite mug may hold a sacred quality, tied to a specific memory or intention. They infuse meaning into objects, routines, and places, sometimes to the point where outsiders think they are overly sentimental or mystical. Yet for the INFJ, these habits are not frivolous. They ground them in a chaotic world and give structure to the intangible currents of life they are always navigating. They rarely say things directly. They often communicate in metaphors, symbols, or indirect hints, as if their thoughts are wrapped in veils. They may appear cryptic or mysterious, and sometimes people are left wondering if there was a hidden meaning behind the INFJ's words. For the INFJ, this habit is less about secrecy and more about the difficulty of compressing vast, abstract thoughts into simple sentences. Their minds work with imagery and interconnected concepts, so their words often reflect that inner landscape. To someone not attuned, it can feel like riddles or half-spoken truths, but to those who understand, It is an artful way of capturing what cannot be said directly. Highly intelligent INFJs usually play out their entire lives or scenarios in their imagination. They might meet a stranger briefly and suddenly imagine that person's entire history, possible future, or the lives they could have had under different circumstances. They daydream with startling intensity, weaving entire storylines that seem as vivid as reality. These mental journeys are not mere escapism. They are how INFJs process the complexity of existence, exploring possibilities without ever leaving their own quiet space. Another unusual habit is their selective sharing of knowledge. INFJs often know more than they reveal, but they hold back, waiting for the right moment or the right person before unveiling what they see. This restraint can make them appear distant or even secretive, but in truth, it is a form of care. They sense that people are not always ready for the truths they carry, so they protect others by filtering their insights. To outsiders, this can feel strange. Why hold back what you know? But to the INFJ, timing and receptivity are everything. They can be both minimalistic and deeply sentimental, both hermit-like and intensely social, both idealistic dreamers and pragmatic problem solvers. Their strange balancing act often confuses others because they seem to embody contradictions that should not coexist, yet somehow do. They may appear to be full of contradictions, but to them, it is simply the integration of multiple layers of themselves. They have a tendency of cloaking themselves in social camouflage. They might adapt their mannerisms, tone of voice, or even vocabulary depending on who they're with. Not because they are inauthentic, but because they instinctively understand how to mirror others in order to make them comfortable. To outsiders, this shifting quality can appear mysterious, even unsettling, as if the INFJ has multiple identities. Yet for them, it is a way of surviving in a world where their true intensity is often too much for others to handle. They rarely create in a linear, organized way. Instead, they often work in bursts of inspiration, producing pages of writing, sketches, music, or plans in a single sitting, and then abandoning the work for weeks or months before returning to it. This start-stop rhythm may confuse those who expect steady output, but it reflects the INFJ's deep reliance on inspiration. They cannot create when the vision feels lifeless. They wait until the idea burns brightly again. To others, this can look like inconsistency or procrastination, but to the INFJ, it is the natural rhythm of authentic expression. They don't just like being alone. They often design entire sacred spaces for solitude. They might rearrange their room in a particular way, light candles, or create playlists that evoke certain moods. These rituals are not mere aesthetic choices. They are carefully crafted environments that allow their mind to enter a state of flow. It can seem overly elaborate to someone else, but for the INFJ, atmosphere shapes thought, and thought is their lifeblood. Without such environments, their creativity and inner clarity feel stifled. There is also the odd way they can form intense emotional attachments to people they hardly know. Highly intelligent INFJs may feel an inexplicable connection after a brief encounter, sensing layers of depth in someone that others might overlook. This can lead to a habit of carrying people around in their thoughts long after the interaction has ended. They may wonder how that person is doing, construct imaginary conversations with them, or even dream vividly about them. Outsiders might consider it strange, even obsessive, but for the INFJ, it is simply their way of exploring the resonance they felt in that fleeting moment. They tend to over-ritualize endings. Intelligent INFJs have a hard time letting go, so they often mark the end of relationships, phases, or even simple projects with elaborate internal ceremonies. They might write farewell letters they never send, create playlists to mourn the loss, or go on solitary walks where they symbolically release memories. What seems like unnecessary drama to others is, for the INFJ, a profound way of acknowledging closure. They cannot simply walk away. They must digest, integrate, and ritualize the loss before they can move on. While most people prefer clean answers and simple truths, INFJs are drawn to complexity. They have the strange habit of entertaining two opposing ideas at once, exploring both without needing to resolve them immediately. In discussions, they may argue one side passionately and then just as passionately explore the opposite view. This can frustrate those who crave certainty, but for INFJs, it is a natural way of wrestling with the richness of truth, which rarely fits neatly into one box. They constantly dream of the future while living in the present. INFJs will sometimes map out entire decades of their imagined life in private journals or daydreams, detailing the places they want to live, the relationships they want to build, and the impact they hope to make. Yet, paradoxically, they can be surprisingly spontaneous in the moment, willing to deviate from plans on a whim. This habit of building grand life visions while also letting go of them when the moment calls for it is puzzling to others. But for the INFJ, it represents a deep trust in intuition. The plans are there to serve as scaffolding, not prisons. They often have long stretches of time where they refrain from speaking, not out of shyness, but out of reverence for the weight of words. They can sit in silence with someone, letting the presence itself communicate more than speech ever could. To many, this seems eerie or uncomfortable, but for the INFJ, silence is alive, full of meaning, and sometimes far more truthful than words. While most people might judge an environment by how it looks, INFJs seem to feel it. They have an odd ability to sense when a room carries tension, sadness, or joy, as though the emotional residue of past conversations lingers in the air. Because of this sensitivity, they often rearrange their furniture, light incense, or open windows just to reset the energy. To outsiders, this can look like fussiness or superstition, but it's a subconscious method of emotional hygiene. Their inner equilibrium is deeply affected by the emotional climate of their surroundings, so cleansing that energy becomes as important to them as cleaning the room itself. They have the tendency to have long, imaginary dialogues with people who aren't present. These aren't always about fantasy or delusion. It's how INFJs process unresolved emotions. If they felt misunderstood, hurt, or disconnected from someone, they might mentally revisit the conversation and speak what they couldn't say out loud. They may even pace around the room, whispering to themselves as if the other person were standing there. To the INFJ, this ritual offers closure, understanding, and sometimes forgiveness. It's their private therapy, a silent way of reconciling internal dissonance. Many of them find themselves working best at night, when the world quiets down and the chaos of human activity fades. They come alive in solitude, under dim light, surrounded by stillness. Nighttime becomes their sanctuary, a womb of reflection where their ideas unfold uninterrupted. Psychologically, the darkness also symbolizes their fascination with the hidden, the unseen motives, secret truths, and the mysterious nature of the human psyche. They're not afraid of shadows. They study them, within themselves and others, seeking transformation through understanding. They tend to time travel in their minds. A simple scent, a song, or a glance can transport them back years, reliving every detail as though it were happening in the present moment. They don't recall memories as distant events. They re-experience them emotionally. Because of this, they often journal or create art to externalize those vivid recollections, turning nostalgia into something tangible. But this also means they can get lost in the corridors of their own past, revisiting wounds not to wallow in them, but to reframe them with meaning. For them, remembering is a sacred act, a way of turning pain into wisdom. They often find meaning where others see coincidence. A repeated number, a song that plays at just the right moment, or a line in a book that echoes something they've been pondering. They see these as signs, not accidents. To others, this might appear mystical or irrational, but for the INFJ, life is a conversation with the universe. These symbols provide guidance, reassurance, and connection to something larger than themselves. It's not blind superstition. It's intuitive pattern recognition elevated to a spiritual art form. While most people react to situations as they come, INFJs unconsciously sense where emotional dynamics are heading. They might feel tension building in a relationship long before a conflict occurs, or sense a friend's withdrawal days before it's visible. This foresight often leads them to act preemptively, offering comfort before distress is expressed, or distancing themselves from someone before the relationship unravels. It's not paranoia. It's pattern intuition. They read subtle shifts and emotional microsignals, though they rarely explain how they know, because they themselves can't always articulate it. They also have a habit of disappearing emotionally while still being physically present. In social settings, they can appear calm and attentive, but internally, they've retreated far into thought. It's as though their body remains at the table, but their mind is wandering through vast conceptual landscapes. They might be replaying a conversation, imagining a future possibility, or analyzing the motivations of everyone around them. This quiet withdrawal often goes unnoticed until someone tries to get their attention and realizes their gaze is distant, almost trance-like. They constantly test the authenticity of others without them realizing it. They might subtly express a vulnerable truth or an unpopular opinion just to see how the other person reacts. If the reaction feels genuine and empathetic, they open up further. If it feels dismissive or shallow, they retreat behind an invisible wall. These tests are not manipulative. They're protective instincts born from years of misunderstanding. The INFJ's soul requires depth and honesty to feel safe, and so they build invisible gates that only the sincere can pass through. They can romanticize solitude to a degree that seems almost strange. While most people seek solitude for rest, INFJs treat it as a sacred ceremony. They don't simply be alone. They create an atmosphere around it. They might dim the lights, put on nostalgic music, and wrap themselves in a familiar blanket while allowing their thoughts to drift like poetry through the quiet. Solitude becomes a ritual of self-restoration, a time when their spirit breathes freely without the noise of external energy. Yet, this habit can make them seem withdrawn or emotionally distant to others, when in reality, it's their form of communion with their own soul. They are never fully satisfied with who they are, not because they dislike themselves, but because they feel called to evolve continually. They shed layers of identity the way snakes shed skin, reinventing themselves quietly, without announcement. This can confuse those around them. Friends may notice that their tone, interests, or even moral convictions have shifted over time. To the INFJ, life is not about consistency. It's about depth, and depth requires constant death and rebirth. They often joke internally that they outgrow themselves faster than anyone else can keep up. When they make a decision that clashes with their inner ethics, sleep becomes impossible. They will replay the event endlessly, feeling the emotional vibrations of every choice, every word, until they reconcile it with their conscience. Even small dishonesty or insensitivity can haunt them. This intense self-accountability makes them appear rigid or self-critical, but it springs from their devotion to integrity. They can forgive others easily but struggle immensely to forgive themselves because they hold themselves to the same impossible moral ideals they wish existed in the world. They also have a habit of secretly detaching from reality when it becomes too harsh. When the world's chaos overwhelms them, INFJs often retreat into rich inner fantasies, not the escapism of avoidance, but the sanctuary of reimagination. They rebuild reality in their minds, crafting alternate worlds where harmony, beauty, and justice prevail. These inner universes are their coping mechanism, a place where they realign with hope before facing life again. It's their silent rebellion against despair, a refusal to let cynicism extinguish their inner light. Intelligent INFJs often sense when a chapter of their life is closing, whether it's a relationship, a job, or a phase of identity. Without consciously deciding, they begin to detach emotionally, organize their space, and symbolically prepare for departure. It's as if their intuition whispers that change is near, and they begin to make peace with it before it happens. By the time others are shocked by the ending, the INFJ has already mourned, accepted, and evolved beyond it in silence. If you want to truly understand yourself and unlock your full potential as an INFJ, check out the INFJ Playbook today. The link is in the description of this video.